they want to rein that in. If it has more than a certain threshold of an impact, it needs extra reviews, because you can't have the rule-making process just run away and run over the lawmaking process, which we've seen in several different areas.
Hey, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King. I'm Carolina Journal's editor-in-chief. This is everything you need to know on public policy and politics in North Carolina. We've got a ton to break down, but first, joining us this week for expert analysis, we have Brianna Kramer, who has been covering the state legislature this week. If you've been following it, it has been nuts. We'll break it all down right now and let you know what's been happening. And also, Jeff Moore, the John Locke Foundation's new VP of Communications. Congratulations, Jeff.
Thanks very much.
I'm excited to see what you can do with it and make this all bright and fresh and new and get lots of good information out to everybody. Brianna, I'm going to start with you, actually, because it has been a week. All right, let's start with the House. What's been happening in the state legislature on the House side?
Yeah, there's been a lot of legislation going through the House and Senate this week, passing on the floor of each. On the House side, we have some interesting legislation that just passed on Wednesday. The REINS Act, that's regulations in need of scrutiny in the executive branch. And so this is an effort led by Representative Chesser. And this is really dealing with the bureaucracy and the administrative state here in North Carolina within the executive branch. So essentially what this bill does is give the state legislature a role to play when dealing with these rules and regulations coming out of different state agencies. So if that rule is going to cost the economy or in North Carolina over $1 million throughout the year, the General Assembly says we want to have a role in examining what this rule may be, how this is going to cost taxpayers, and we want to be the final say on approving it. So that's what the REINS Act does. And it's, you know, just really something that they're trying to say is going to bring accountability and more representation to the people.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, by putting just elected officials in a role of examining what maybe unelected officials in the executive branch are pushing forward.
I know you've got a long list, but one of the things about the REINS Act that I think is super interesting is that it reflects what we're seeing at the national level. This idea that folks who were not elected are making these very expensive regulations for business owners and that kind of thing. But opponents of this are saying, look, you're going to slow down the regulatory process. We're not going to be able to enforce rules. Do you think that's exactly why? What do you think?
Yeah, I think coming from the Democrat side, that's what they were saying is like you're overstepping your bounds as the state legislature because of the separations of powers. They say the executive branch has the authority to do what they're doing, and that's just stepping on their toes. So that would be their argument against it. It did pass in a 68-44 vote, and what I found was interesting is that one Democrat did support it, which is crucial if they want to override the governor's potential veto.
Interesting. All right, what else is the House doing?
Yeah, one more interesting one from the House side is the Farmland and Military Protection Act. So that also passed unanimously, which is interesting, and it bans foreign adversary governments from purchasing farmland in North Carolina near military installations. So 75 miles around any kind of military site here in North Carolina, countries like China, Russia, Venezuela would not be allowed to purchase. So I think that's a growing concern among voters, is that we have a lot of land around the whole country that's being purchased by foreign governments. And so legislators together, both sides of the aisle, took a step to say, at least around military installations in North Carolina, we do not want them coming anywhere near for national security purposes.
Sure. You've spent a lot of time really talking and digging into these grassroots folks who live sometimes around these military bases, and there's been some concern about foreign land around them. Do you think that there's some pressure on lawmakers to do something about this?
Yeah, I think it's actually from both ends of the spectrum. You've got the grassroots kind of worry about, they see what's going on in the kind of the journalistic ecosystem about the things the Communist Party of China may be doing. We know that a company that's a Chinese-owned company is not necessarily a freely owned company. We know that they are an extension of the government of China, and so we have a super adversarial relationship. It's getting more and more adversarial each day. And then, so the grassroots are aware of that, but also you have our military leaders that they've been concerned about even small things. So when there are like wind farms going up near Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, they had problems with that because it may interrupt flight paths. So they're always looking out for the security of that military installation. North Carolina has a huge military installation footprint. We've got a lot of veterans as well, but those active military leaders want to be sure at the federal level and the state level that there are not any more cases of Chinese ownership of lands that are directly adjacent to sensitive military sites. And so we've actually had examples of this in places around the country. In Texas, there's a big purchase of a wind farm, and then they're extending the height of the windmills.
Yikes.
That would put it at a height to where they could actually, if they had kind of surveillance technology, that they could actually spy on what's going on in the military base there that handles very sensitive stuff. So this is a real national security concern, and I bet there's a lobby going on across the country for state governments to pass restrictions just like this.
I'm sure. Before we move on to what the Senate is working on, the REINS Act, this is something that the Locke Foundation, and now in your new role as communications, they've been really talking about this. Organizations across the country talking about putting some guardrails on the regulatory process in North Carolina. Talk a little bit about why.
Yeah, and we've got a great video up on the REINS Act, actually, with one of our lead analysts, Mitch Kokai, talking about the REINS Act and why it'd be so important. But you've got a bureaucratic state problem in this country at a federal level and at a state level. So you have lawmakers that are elected, and they are elected to duly pass the laws in this state. But then you have a kind of an administrative state that passes a lot of rules that end up having the power and effect of laws. Rules that regulate businesses, our energy production, all sorts of things, environmental restrictions of where you can build houses, how you're supposed to build houses, things like that. So you've got a ballooning of government control that's not necessarily accountable to actual the voters and the people that actually turn over the legislature every couple of years. So they want to rein that in. If it has more than a certain threshold of an impact, it needs extra reviews, because you can't have the rule making process just run away and run over the lawmaking process, which we've seen in several different areas. In 2020, we had a rulemaking process go over the heads of the lawmakers in elections as the state board settled that lawsuit. And actually changed some rules that judges later said you can't do that because these have the effect of laws. You're effectively changing laws here. So it's sorely needed in all sorts of areas, and it is an excellent tool to actually rein in with the REINS Act, cleverly named there, to actually rein in the size and scope of government, especially the bureaucratic ends where they have so many impacts across the economy.
Well, and how do you protect efficiency? Because that's something that Brianna was telling us, that the opponents of this, some of the Democrats were saying, look, you're really inserting yourselves in the regulatory process, and it's just not going to be efficient if that's what you want. If what you want is efficiency, it's not going to work.
Yeah, well, you have to prioritize the things that you want to be efficient at, and so you should be efficient at protecting the secured liberty of the citizens of North Carolina first and foremost. And so government being slow and methodical is actually by design here. Since our founding, our Constitution sets up our 3 branches of government, getting things through from beginning to end and actually in law or in effect is a slow and painful process a lot of times. A lot of people bang their head against the wall thinking, I wish this was easier. We could be more efficient at doing things, but we don't necessarily want the government to be more efficient at doing some things, because that thing they're efficient at could be actually stepping on our rights and economic freedoms as citizens in North Carolina. So the efficiency is really on the financial side of things. You don't want to spend too much money, but they can take all the time in the world to review rules and make sure that they're not actually overstepping their authorities, that it's actually in line with the constitutional principles we have in North Carolina.
Sure. All right. Is that everything from the House? So there's so much going on.
Yeah, there's several press conferences this week. I mean, both sides of the aisle came together to advocate for dads being present in their children's lives. So that was a nice press conference to see them advocate for fatherless homes and just for these children to have their dads present. And so that was a nice press conference we'll have coverage on soon. And then
now this does put state money toward an effort to do it, to
in
promote
schools. So it's partnering with school districts to kind of push forward this effort to have dads
Engage,
come in,
yeah.
engage in school activities and stuff, like after school events and stuff like that.
Interesting. All right, I look
So,
forward to
yeah,
seeing
kind
it.
of
It'll be
more of a cultural thing.
Yeah, of course. I like that. I mean, comment on carolinajournal.com and comment below. Let us know what you think about this, because it is state money, you know, and it is a cultural issue, but disengaged fathers in American culture has really increased in recent years. And I think it's splitting along socioeconomic lines. I know you're super engaged with your family. My husband's very engaged, but it's changing. Do we need to promote father's engagement at home? And I think that's a really interesting point. And should the legislature be involved in that? So let us know what you think. Comment below. What else is going on?
Yeah, so let's turn gears to the Senate
Okay.
side now. Certificate of Need. That was passed on the Senate floor this week, and so that's repealing certain
Sure.
Certificate of Need laws within the healthcare industry in North Carolina. So really, legislators on this issue argue that it's anti-competitive to have
Sure.
these CON laws in place that are really restricting hospitals, how many beds they can
Sure.
have in their facility, if they're approved for certain equipment.
Right.
So it's really causing delays, and it's causing it to not be a free market.
Okay.
And so they're going to rescind some of these laws to kind of free up the market and allow the healthcare industry to kind of become a little bit more competitive and
Sure.
hopefully reduce costs, because here in North Carolina, healthcare costs are some of the highest in the country.
Wow, wow, very interesting. All right, well, so the Senate tends to just move things through really fast, I think. I guess they negotiate it first and then they keep going.
Yeah, they do. On the
Okay.
House floor, they get it through pretty quickly. So they got that through as an individual bill.
Okay.
But they also inserted CON laws within the budget. So
Repealing,
this is,
repealing.
repealing CON in the budget. And
Okay.
so that was introduced this week and passed this week. So you're right, it did move fast this week,
Right.
the Senate's budget proposal. So they introduced it on Monday, and now by Thursday, it's passed
Wow.
and onto the House side.
Okay.
So there's a lot within this budget, a lot we could talk
Crazy.
about.
It is. It's very $33 billion almost.
Yes, it is. It's total for the next 2 years. So they drafted as a biennium 2-year budget, $66 billion.
Wow.
$32.6 billion for this year. The proposal, the whole budget is 439 pages, so a lot of material in there, a lot that they're pushing through
Sure.
within one budget. They're funding Hurricane Helene efforts, $700 million for that, pay raises for state employees
Okay.
and for teachers, which has been
Sure.
a huge argument. How much should teachers get a pay raise for, and all state employees that they're having a
Right.
hard time recruiting for some open positions. So a variety of increases in their pay raises and $3,000 bonuses for a lot of state employees.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm sure
Yeah.
that they were glad about that.
Yeah. Well, we heard both sides, positive news on
Okay.
pay raises, but also pushback on it's not enough.
Sure.
Of course, that's to be expected. And then lots of interesting policy initiatives as well in here. The income tax rate, they want to continue to lower that, which is interesting.
Right.
They want to get rid of those triggers.
Okay.
And continue lowering it like they've been doing, Republicans have for the last decade or so.
Okay.
They want to lower it to 3.49% in 2027, and then in 2028, 2.99. So they're continuing with this slow decline in our income tax rate.
Okay.
And then some other interesting policy initiatives, the carbon plan.
Right.
They want to get rid of the state's interim 70% carbon reduction goal by 2030. So that
Okay.
was in a different bill.
Right.
And so they're kind of pulling together some
Sure.
of their drafted
It's
legislation.
not going to pass one way, it'll pass the other. Yeah.
Exactly. So because they have to negotiate with the House now. And so if they're not going to get it through maybe in their individual bill that
Right.
maybe one sponsor is pushing, they want to incorporate it into this 400-page budget.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, it's the Christmas tree we've talked about.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes, all the wish list items right in here. So 2 more interesting policy items. Medicaid, the budget directs DHHS to move forward with seeking work requirements for Medicaid. And then, like I mentioned before, the Certificate of Need repeal
Sure.
is
Sure.
also
So
in
those
there.
2 things, work requirements for Medicaid and certificate of need, it's something we've talked about, and certainly the John Locke Foundation has talked about. When they expanded Medicaid, it added 600,000 people to the Medicaid rolls. The split, the 90-10, Feds pays for 90% of that expansion. The state pays for 10. If that changes, North Carolina's budget is going to be in some hurt.
Yeah, and based on that legislation, actually, if the federal funding formula does change, then the law would be suspended. So the expansion would be undone. So it was written in the statute that if the 90-10 ratio ever does change, then this expansion is going to be reversed.
So certificate of need and adding work requirements, that should hopefully bring down the costs for both healthcare and the state, right?
Because the 600,000+ people that are added to the Medicaid rolls, it was an extension beyond the current threshold for the percentage above the poverty level, but they're also able-bodied people.
Sure.
So these aren't people that are truly handicapped and unable to work. They are able to work.
Right.
And often, and many of them actually had insurance through different plans before the Medicaid expansion came through.
So they dropped their regular insurance and picked up Medicaid.
Yeah. So with work requirements coming back in, that may change some of these numbers, but what is especially kind of you want to watch out for is if with all of this movement at the federal level to drive efficiency and really shake up and do different reforms, if they were to go back to the 60-40 split that we have for the rest of our Medicaid population, then that's a bill that North Carolina is not prepared to pay.
Right.
And when they were passing Medicaid expansion, they really banked on, hey, this is a 90-10 split. It just
Free
makes
money.
sense for us to do this. And if it were to ever go, that 90-10 split were ever go away, then we will simply suspend this expansion and those people will come off the rolls. But that's politically very messy. Once you give an entitlement benefit to people, actually taking it back would be like kind of political suicide, and that's why it's so hard to actually get rid of government programs, especially ones where you're handing money from one person's pocket to another person's pocket. They're not going to want to give that up, and they're going to raise a lot of ire if you suggest, well, the funding formula changed, so we're just going to kind of pull this back now.
How do you
so
take
it put us in a really tough spot, and it would be billions and billions of dollars every year that we'd be responsible for. So with the tax cuts coming, with some kind of expected and historical caution about the revenues coming in the next couple of years. I know that they look at the revenues as a forecast. They're not typically accurate, actually. They usually overstate the case about revenues kind of shrinking, but we need to be able to look at those things, especially in light of this Medicaid change that could come.
Absolutely. All right, so what's next? What should we be looking for? What are you watching for the next couple of weeks?
Well, this budget, this is kind of the big thing of the long session.
Right.
So now that the Senate has initiated the process of working with the House on getting this pushed forward, we're going to keep seeing action in the weeks ahead on that. So the new fiscal year starts July 1st. So the goal, as Senator Berger pointed out the other day, hopefully, fingers crossed, he said, we can have it done by the end of June and passed. But that's not always the case.
We've tried that, Oh, no, hope springs eternal, of course.
Yeah, but I think it actually is earlier this year, interestingly enough, that the Senate's passed this budget now.
Right.
And typically, I believe they wait till May or so to start, getting it through the floor.
Sure, so the House will probably come up with theirs in, what do you think, May? We've been covering it a long time.
They're expecting that next month. And so, as she just mentioned, usually it's around the end of May and the Memorial Day weekend that they finally come together and they have a consensus kind of spending number that they've agreed to, in the House and the Senate have their respective drafts. But the Senate's moving pretty quickly this year. We should see the House draft next month.
Okay, this will also be the first true test of Governor Stein. Will he veto it? That's something that we've saw a lot with Governor Cooper, vetoing budget after budget, even if it had teacher raises, even if it had everything. If it didn't have Medicaid expansion, which we just talked about, he would veto it. So where is Governor Stein going to come in on this? We're going to be really following that very closely. Please check out carolinajournal.com for analysis, more details on all of this, and some great opinion material. And for the latest on the Griffin-Riggs saga unfolding for the North Carolina Supreme Court, you can find it all at carolinajournal.com. Please make sure that you comment below. We want to hear from you and continue this conversation. Thanks so much for joining us. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.